To really sell the performance of a puppet, you need servos. The more servos you can fit into its tiny little face, the more parts of the face you can move and the more realistic its performance. So, if you made a big enough puppet, you could pack enough servos into its face to win an Oscar, no? Well, actually, this made Gizmo's performance worse. Stick around as we explore all the crazy practical effects that were used to bring Gremlins to life. Set at Christmas time, Gremlins 1 was actually filmed in LA during the summer. So if Billy looks convincingly sweaty in many scenes, it's not because of unreal acting skills, if not because of the 40-degree heatwave whilst wearing a sweater and thick duffel coat. All the snow was just white sand, and for close-up shots they covered the sand with a sprinkling of ice chips. A telltale sign is that there's snow everywhere, but you don't see Billy or anyone else's breath. The production team wanted to shoot Gremlins on real locations, but the director Joe Dante feared that the Gremlin puppets would look too fake if filmed in the real world. So they shot the movie in an obvious backlot town with obviously stylized sets, a place that wasn't quite real, and because the Gremlins weren't quite real either, they meshed together beautifully. This was a balance that the team was constantly faced with, especially after having divided the scenes into 3 sections. Scenes with just actors, scenes with actors and Gremlins, and finally all of the Gremlin-only scenes. This seemed sensible at the time, but according to the director, after having been shooting Gremlins-only scenes for 2.5 months, he lost sight of whether they looked realistic or not. With nothing to anchor them into reality, it was really easy to see them as too fantastical. Perhaps this was when they decided stop motion would be totally fine. The production team quickly found that because the Gremlins would be doing lots of things like throwing plates and whatnot, they were going to need longer arms. Also, they would need shorter legs, because in puppets, legs are really hard to add believable motion to. That's why in most shots the Gremlins are only waist high, and why Gizmo is always carried. So that's how they eventually settled on the perfect length ratio for the arms and legs. One of the times they needed Gizmo to run on his own in broad daylight, without dying.
Gotta keep him out of the sunlight.
For this shot, they actually built a huge life-size Gizmo, big enough for a small person to fit inside and run, much like an Ewok from Star Wars. However, this would imply making all the props and sets used in the shot even bigger, and they weren't convinced with the sudden realism brought to the obvious puppet Gizmo. He suddenly became too real compared to the rest of his scenes. In the end, they just made another animatronic Gizmo with moving legs and shot it on a blue screen. They filmed a plate of the sidewalk and added Gizmo to it digitally, with a clever piece of trash getting kicked aside to sell the integration. The different mogwais, or devils in Chinese, required a different amount of operators to control according to what expressions were needed, but almost everyone had tons of wires coming out of him to control all of his movements. A small team of up to 8 puppeteers would have to hide off shot, controlling the small mogwai. He also had stick-on expressions that could be changed out according to his mood. And because you can only fit so many servo motors inside a small puppet's head, for close-up scenes of Gizmo's face, they had to build a much bigger puppet that they could fit loads more servos into. Of course, all of the props around him had to also be oversized to match his scale. Lip sync is another really hard challenge with puppets, and if done badly, is yet another way to break the illusion that you're watching a character and not just a puppet. And because there was such a fast and complex dialogue, mainly with the brain gremlin, Rick Baker decided to pre-record and pre-program the lip movements so that they would move autonomously, whilst the rest of the puppet's actions were happening live. This would free up the operators to concentrate solely on the gremlin's arm and body movements. The set designers would always have to ask where the gremlins would appear, because they would always need a small hole in the set to puppeteer. But because director Joe Dante was always so open to suggestions, he would add all sorts of things for the Gremlins to do whilst filming. And so by the end of the shoot, the sets would resemble something like Swiss cheese. Rick Baker was called in to do the puppets for the second film, but he turned it down because Gizmo and the Gremlins were already created. Gizmo, in fact, had been based on Spielberg's dog. Rick felt there was nothing more he could really add. He only accepted the job because they allowed him to go crazy creating a whole menagerie of variations, and even made it part of the story. A bat gremlin, a girl gremlin, a spider gremlin, and even a vegetable gremlin. According to Rick, it was easier and more fun to create puppets for movies in the 90s. The director would look at the concept painting and usually accept, trusting in the prop department's abilities. But nowadays, directors are used to being offered up hundreds of maquettes, which never see the light of day, before deciding on a mix of 2 or 3. There's a running theme in Gremlins movies that they hijack a movie theatre, and a little Easter egg from the production team to the director. In Gremlins 2, they even cut the projection tape and made shadow puppets, and even put on an adult movie. Until Hulk Hogan gets up and complains about it.
Listen up!
However, this scene was replaced in the VHS version with white noise and featured cameos from Bugs Bunny and John Wayne. The Gremlins movies pushed the boundaries of what could be done with puppets without disengaging the audience from the performance. As CGI was still in its infancy, they had to try to keep as many of the visual effects in camera as possible. And perhaps that is what makes these quirky and nostalgic movies so damn adorable.
It takes a certain kind of guy.
And that guy needs a certain kind of pain.